Hello good people, Nero once again from the Overclocker. So 3 weeks ago, AMD announced its Ryzen 8000 APUs, and while the 8700G has had mixed receptions, largely due to what many consider an inappropriate price, the Ryzen 5 8600G has had a much easier time. For 5,500 or so locally, it's easily the most affordable way to get a gaming capable machine. But before we go further though, what actually is an APU? AMD defines it as an accelerated processing unit, but to you and me, it's a CPU with awesome graphics. A simplistic and reductionist description for sure, and one that's even less appropriate now because of AI and so forth. However, to us, the end users, we use our chip confined mostly to graphics and specifically to gaming loads. As such, I tested a few games to see how it performs, and I have to say I'm pleasantly surprised by what the 8600G can do. But before we go further though, let's just cover the basics. So the Ryzen 5 8600G is a 6-core 12-thread processor that's based on the Zen 4 architecture, and it has a boost clock of 5 GHz. It has half the L3 cache of a normal Ryzen 5 7600 CPU at only 16 MB of L3. However, for that sacrifice, it does gain an RDNA 3 based graphics portion, and the GPU operates at 2.8 GHz while the memory speed is naturally dependent on the RAM in your system. I tested this CPU on the B650 Aorus Elite X AX ICE motherboard using the G.Skill Trident Z5 DDR5 memory. So in Forza Horizon, using the medium preset, the 8600G was able to deliver a playable 62 frames per second at 1080p, a more than impressive showing for the 8600. When using an even higher memory speed, the performance almost 80 frames per second. In fact, many times it was above 80 frames per second. Moving on to Hitman 3 though, I was not able to use a higher texture detail than low, but with the rest of the settings set to medium, I was again recording just over 60 frames per second. RT unfortunately is definitely a no-go in this title, but at the going price of the APU, I am definitely not complaining. Next up I tried was Cyberpunk. This is one of the tougher tests for the APU, and FSR here is a must as 1080p will simply be unplayable regardless of the setting. As such, I picked the low preset and set FSR to balanced. Here we can see the performance is 44 frames per second, so perhaps best stick to, or cap it rather, and increasing the DRAM frequency and a slight GPU overclock can actually take that closer to 60 frames per second. As you can see here, I recorded 57 frames per second in the same test with the same settings, just with the overclock. And then finally, we have Metro Exodus, the Enhanced Edition, which is ancient by now, but it does remain a taxing title. Frame rates right off the bat at 1080p are just too low, they're in the teens or late 20s. So that said, I would say if you want to play this game on the APU, 720 is where you want to be, as the performance is improved dramatically, and in fact I would even say it's more than playable. So now we finally get to move on to the synthetics. You can see that overclocking or running higher memory speeds has significant effects on GPU performance. I can imagine that being able to run DDR5 8000 would add even more performance to the GPU, but as it stands, DDR5 7600 did an excellent job at increasing test scores and gaming results of course. 3D Mark Firestrike gains nearly 2000 points from the overclock, while Unigine Superposition doesn't gain as much. I use the 1080p Extreme preset of course, which is largely inappropriate for this APU, but it does allow me to compare it in future with discrete GPUs that may be coming. Overall, I'd say the Ryzen 5 8600G is a winning processor. General compute tasks may suffer depending on what you're using it for, and the reduced cache sometimes does rear its head. But for the majority of the time, you'll be hard pressed to tell the difference between this and say a Ryzen 5 7600 CPU. In terms of optimizing performance, higher memory speed here helps a lot. The GPU overclock limit is about 200 MHz, which won't do much for you, but for the memory, it's simply down to your DRAM in your system. The faster the DRAM you have, the better the APU will perform, and the performance gains are substantial. DDR5 5200 is clearly holding back the 760M GPU, so as a minimum I'd say consider DDR5 6400. Power consumption is where the Ryzen 5 8600G is actually exceptional. Out the box, you'll not draw more than 70 watts of power, and that's even when gaming. The highest power draw when exploiting PBO and under load I recorded was 90 watts. Temperatures are not as impressive though, as they are normal at about 84 degrees maximum, so nothing to write home about there. idle power, however, is where there may be some concerns, as it's a little on the high side. Even in the desktop, just sitting with the CPU or the APU doing nothing, I was drawing at least 20 watts, and I suspect that's the GPU, as that's what was recorded with any GPU testing tool that I found. That aside, I'm happy with the 8600G, to be honest, and what it's offering. At the going price, you can put together a gaming PC for 10 grand, which hasn't been possible for the most part until, I would say, now with the Ryzen 5 8600G. Anyway, what do you guys think of the Ryzen 5 8600 APU? Is it worth the going price? Would you even consider one? Until next time, take care of yourselves. Remember to share, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. So take care and peace.